Hi guys. I hope everyone's having a really great weekend. I'm just gonna chat for a little bit about Persepolis, which I just finished, and I'm so overwhelmed by it. I thought it was an excellent choice for my first ever real front to back graphic novel read. It really stuck with me. It hit hard with me. And I think it's definitely a great literacy developing piece. Just first of all, the the concept that really stuck with me was the idea of like this historical context and this war not being clouded by and not being told through the lens of like, oh, dates and times and battles and bombings and, a bit more like distanced story. This was just through the lens of a young person and seeing how this war and living in Iran and like all of how everything affected her. I think that that's an incredible way to not only open up these discussions about war, but just also have our students kind of look at it through the lens of like an individual and a teenager, just kind of mapping out what war looks like anywhere for anyone. And just kind of, I think also it's a good outlet to bring in discussions about maybe contention that Americans can have with people from the Middle East and just breaking down those barriers, which I just think I have not experienced at all when I was in school. I think that specifically this genre was the right way to tell this story. I think there were so many aspects of the story that I wouldn't have gotten if it had just been a regular text only novel. Specifically, I think that, especially in this example that I have up first, I feel like the way it's told is really in this like thematic and storytelling way, which personally I really helps me remember and feel, and it helps things stick with me. And so in this example, Europe is kind of personified in this like villainesque image, like looking down upon the future Shah saying, you will have everything, power, shoe shiners, everything you want in cash. Well, what do I have to do? Oh, nothing, just give us oil and then we'll do everything else. It's just the oil. It's not a big deal. Like this, using the images in this way paints that whole like tone in a way that you wouldn't have gotten really otherwise, and it's painting this manipulation in a very like thematic and storytelling way rather than just saying, oh, okay, so at this time this European leader decided to I just thought that there was a lot to be learned. Even now at my age, I was learning a lot through reading about this war through this lens, because it just hits you, in a different way than it would have otherwise. Similarly, I think that this text did a really great job, the genre specifically, of teaching and kind of like showing how age can affect a narrator. Because I feel like as we went through the narrator growing up, her thought processes and how she viewed the world, it was very clear. When she's young, it's kind of a bit more naive, and how her own like evolution into the way she looks at the world around her kind of grows and evolves. And that's a skill that I don't know if I've ever really put to the test in any of my English classes. And I think it's something that you could definitely put under the microscope and work with in a classroom. How does her age kind of affect the way the story is being told at this point, and how is it different from the beginning to the end? This is something you could definitely analyze, especially in the context of this this graphic novel, because I just love how this was done, where our young narrator is starting to learn about her family history, and her dad's like, yeah, well, your grandfather was a prince, and she's like, what? And her dad's like, well, that's not even the important part, like that's not that important. Like, listen to the story. And she's like, what do you mean that's not important? And she just has this almost like heart eyes moment. She's like, my grandpa was a prince. And this funny, like, image that she's envisioning, this like glorified idea. And it's just so funny because like any young kid who hears that, of course they're going to take a second to just be like, hold up, what? Like royalty? That's cool. Tell me more. So I thought that that was a great example of a, I don't know if it's a device necessarily or just like a technique. That's something that you could definitely look into as a class. And it's funny. Similarly, I think that the genre really lends itself to analysis and really getting to the idea of like what's the author's message and what's the meaning, and maybe like, you know, we have standards that are talking about analyzing author's intent through analyzing text, and I think that in this way we could really be developing that visual literacy aspect, because taking this as an example, the mom slaps the nanny and the narrator because they went to a demonstration on a day that many people were killed. And that kind of like chastised feeling, that, you know, unease that they did something kind of wrong and they've been slapped. I just think the image of the slap kind of remaining on their faces and that black shadow is so impactful. And that's something that you wouldn't get if you just read the text. You wouldn't see that they were even slept at all. And so I think that this could also be an opportunity to say, how is this message if we just look at the text? If you like have an image of just the text laid out, and then if you just had the images separated for a class to look at, and then you put them together, like how is the message different in each of these three scenarios, and what do you think the author is trying to say here? That's a huge learning opportunity, and for just teaching, you know, context and I guess even tone and implied and, you know, implicit kind of messages and things like that. And you could even then go into the idea of like analyzing implicit messages and author's intent in propaganda. Like you could go so many ways with this, but I just think it's really could be developing those literacy skills there. Similarly, one of my favorite parts about this book was the ability to balance so much humor into such a serious topic. I laughed out loud a few times reading this, and if you take this as an example, this is actually a very kind of like scary and uneasy concept of a mom. Like there's a raid going on and a mom just throwing her baby into the young narrator's arms, like abandoning their child. And then the narrator's like deadpan, again, use of this genre, deadpan, looking into the, almost like the camera or like the lens, like almost like The Office, holding the baby. Since that day, I've had doubts about the so-called maternal instinct. I mean, that's hilarious. And that like idea of we can use sarcasm, which first of all, I think that relates to teenagers on a whole level, like on its own, because their sense of humor oftentimes can be quite sarcastic and they'll like respond to that. But I think it's also just like a really solid choice to be making those humorous decisions about something that could be really like uncomfortable and scary in a way. I just think it's just so honest. And again, it's humanizing, it's individualizing it. And I think that that's a great way to teach technique if you're trying to talk about like sarcasm or irony. And then again, you know, utilizing text versus image and message and all of that could be a great opportunity to teach students. And then when it comes down to it, the last thing I really want to talk about when it comes to Persepolis as like a great mentor text for many different reasons, I think a big part of this for me that I loved was, again, the ability to blend like the light and easy with the serious and the difficult. But also the fact that even though it's humanized and individualized and it's not just a sob story at every turn, you know, that she really tries to show the sad and maybe difficult aspects of her life in Iran growing up, but also moments of love and friendship and humor and resistance. I just really appreciated, though, that it wasn't just limited to her rah-rah resistance, you know, aspect. It's not just showing one side of, well, everything's okay, though. Like, you know, just because she wanted to showcase that maybe it's not as, you know, her life growing up in Iran isn't maybe what you would have pictured. It actually is a lot more similar to the teenage life in America than you would have ever envisioned. She's also not just showing that side, because she also is not American. She also had to leave her home because of how unsafe her hometown was. She had to leave her parents at a young age. And so that impact of her ending the novel when she leaves Iran, it's not like this story of, and now everything's great, and I'm grown up now, and I found success. And it was like, no, this still is a story of war and how that's detrimental to my country. And I think actually this reminds me a lot of the presentation that we had, and some of us had in class, about teaching the Holocaust and all the complexities that come with that. I think a lot of times in Hollywood, there is that instinct to over-glamorize or just really showcase this rebellious, we're the ones fighting against the Nazis and, doing the right thing kind of storyline, when in reality, that's just really limited scope of this real life catastrophe. And just showing that one glamorized side of it really isn't doing it justice. And we really don't need to, it's not our job to seek out a happy ending, is something that she said. And that really, I think, relates to this text a lot. And I think it's something that we could be imparting on our students within many texts. And this is one example, but I mean, Romeo and Juliet, things like that, where it's like, you don't always have to seek out that happy ending. Could be a lesson in itself. And I just think this text does a great job of balancing humanness, seriousness, historical context. I mean, the connections to a history class or a political science class are just so numerous. And I think that they just did also a great job of not making it all sunshine and rainbows. She found that balance really well. And not even considering also all of the impacts of the genre and the ability to teach students different devices and techniques and meaning and all of those things that are available. Just literacy, visual literacy through this text, I'm really impressed. And so with that, I'll just end on the last image of her as she's in the airport, and she had to say goodbye to her parents, who were putting on a brave face for her as she was leaving. And then she decides to turn back around, and she sees her mom just collapsed in grief from having to say goodbye to her child. And she says it would have been better to just go, and then it's done. And I just think that in and of itself, that could be a lesson topic right there. And just that really hits you, and it hits hard. And overall, I would say, I guess, when I'm summarizing my reaction to Persepolis, it hits hard, but it's also found a great balance, and I think it's got a lot to offer in a classroom. And so can't wait to talk more about it in the replies and hear what you guys have to say, and talk more about the other graphic novel that I'm reading right now, which is the modernized version of Little Women in a graphic novel form. And so that's really been interesting too, because it's a similar thing about taking these stories that could seem quite distant from relevancy in teenagers today, and then finding that all of this relevancy in the teenage experience, where teenagers all over the world or in all different times can relate to these themes. Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk more about that with you guys. See you soon.